The call light had been blinking for 40 minutes when I finally understood that no one was coming. Not the nurses, not my husband, not my mother. No one. I was 35 years old, lying in a hospital bed in the ICU of Mercy Regional in Scranton, Pennsylvania, with a central line in my chest and a monitor beeping every 4 seconds. And the last thing my husband said to me before he walked out the door was, "We have to go. The kids need us." My mother patted my hand, said, "You're stable now, honey," and followed him out. I heard their footsteps in the hallway. I heard the elevator. And then I heard nothing but that monitor, counting my heartbeats, and I thought, if that machine is counting, then I am still here. Hold on to that. You are still here. That was a Tuesday in late November. They did not come back for 3 days. Welcome back to Ravagestories, where secrets come out, betrayals get exposed, and the people who thought they'd get away with it never do. If you're new here, subscribe, join the family. You're going to want to be here for what comes next. Drop a comment where you are listening from. It means a lot to me. Now let's go. My name is Claire, and I need to start at the beginning, because if I drop you into the middle of this story, you will think I am exaggerating. I promise you I am not. I grew up in Lackawanna County, northeastern Pennsylvania, coal country, the kind of place where the mountains are beautiful and the economy has been dying since 1962, and everyone pretends not to notice either thing. My mother, Diane, raised me and my younger brother Trey in a rented house on a dead-end road outside of Clark's Summit. My father left when I was 9, not dramatically. He just stopped coming home, and then one day his tools were gone from the garage, and my mother never mentioned him again. She had a way of closing doors like that, quietly, with both hands, permanently. She worked the early shift at a dry cleaning operation on Moosic Street for 22 years. Her hands were always faintly chemical. She ironed everything, including her own clothes, even the ones that did not require it, because she believed that presentation was the last form of control available to a person with nothing. I grew up watching her press the same gray slacks 3 times a week and call it dignity. I believed her. I still believe her, actually. I just understand now that she was also performing that dignity for an audience that included herself, and that the performance had limits I could not see. I was the one who went to college, first in our family. I went to the University of Scranton on a partial scholarship and a Pell Grant, and I waited tables at a place on Linden Street that smelled like fryer oil and carpet cleaner, and I graduated with a degree in accounting and enough debt to keep me humble for a decade. I wore my mother's navy blazer to the graduation. She had bought it secondhand in 1998 and kept it in a dry cleaning bag ever since, waiting for an occasion. She cried when I walked across that stage, full, quiet tears, the kind she never explained and never had to. I met Marcus 6 months after graduation. He was charming in the way that men who have options are charming, effortlessly, because they never had to develop anything else. He was a regional sales manager for a medical supply company. He had a nice truck and a good laugh, and he told me on our 3rd date that he had never met a woman like me before. I was 26. I believed him. We married in 2 years, and I moved into his house, not ours, a point I would return to later, in a suburb of Scranton called Dalton. We had 2 kids together, Owen and Lily. I kept my accounting job, then moved into bookkeeping for a small law firm downtown, which is where I quietly learned more than my job description required. I watched how documents worked. I watched how money moved. I stored it away the way my mother stored that blazer, for an occasion I hoped would never come. The 3rd pregnancy was high risk from the start. I was 35, my blood pressure ran elevated, and by the 2nd trimester, my OB was using words like monitoring closely and precautionary, with the careful cadence of someone building toward a larger sentence. I was not frightened, exactly. I was watchful. There is a difference, and I knew it. Marcus, during those months, was solicitous in a way that felt almost theatrical. He brought home dinner some nights. He attended 2 of the 4 prenatal appointments. He held my hand during the 3rd trimester ultrasound and said all the correct things. My mother came over on Sundays and sat in my kitchen and drank coffee and told me I was being handled beautifully. I remember thinking that was a strange word, handled, like a situation. The surgery happened at 32 weeks. Placental abruption, sudden, severe, the kind where the attending physician does not have time to fully explain what is happening before they are already moving. I remember the overhead lights in the corridor. I remember a nurse whose name tag said Patricia, who held my wrist and said, "Stay with me, Claire, stay with me." I remember Marcus's face on the other side of a swinging door, and then I was under. I woke up in the ICU. The baby had not survived. I had, barely, and only because of Patricia and a surgical team that earned every credential they ever received. When I opened my eyes the first time, Marcus was standing at the foot of my bed looking at his phone. My mother was in the chair by the window. She stood up when she saw my eyes open and said, "Oh, thank God, honey, you're stable." And I tried to ask about the baby, and the words did not come. And Marcus said, "We have to go. The kids need us." And within 10 minutes, they were gone. I lay there for a long time after that. The monitor counted. 4 seconds, 4 seconds, 4 seconds. The call light blinked. No one came. On the second day, a nurse named Gwen, not Patricia, who I would not see again until the following morning, told me in the measured, careful tone of someone staying inside professional limits that my husband had spoken with the charge nurse. He had described me as someone who, quote, tended toward the dramatic, who had, quote, complicated family dynamics. She did not editorialize. She just set my medication on the tray and straightened my IV line and let the information sit there between us. I understood what she was telling me without either of us having to say it plainly. He had worked the room before I woke up. He had arranged for me to be managed. On the third morning, my colleague Renata, a paralegal from the law firm where I worked, 28 years old, sharp in the way quiet people who read everything are sharp, walked into my room with a gas station coffee and a plastic bag from the gift shop containing a phone charger and a small notebook. She had found out from the billing department. She had told no one she was coming. She set the coffee on my tray and looked at me for a long moment and then said simply, "Where is your husband?" It was not a question. I said, "I don't know." She sat down in the chair where my mother had been and opened the notebook to the first page and uncapped her pen, and she said, "Then let's start there." That was the moment the clock started. Over the next 3 hours, Renata and I talked through everything she had already noticed, which was more than I had let myself admit. The sales trips that extended, the way Marcus had started asking, casually, almost accidentally, about my mother's house in Clark Summit, which Diane owned outright after 30 years of payments, and which was worth somewhere around $240,000. The way Marcus and my mother had begun to align, to agree with each other about things, to present a shared position in ways that made me feel slightly off balance without being able to name why. The Thanksgiving 3 weeks earlier, when Marcus had pulled my mother aside after dinner and they had stood in the kitchen doorway talking in low voices for 20 minutes while I put the kids to bed, and when I came back down they both smiled and said nothing had happened, just talking. The baby's name was going to be Rose. We had chosen it together, Marcus and I, on a Sunday drive through the Pocono foothills when everything still felt workable. I had not said her name to anyone yet. I wrote it in the notebook Renata brought me, on the inside front cover, and I left it there. Some things are kept, not used. Renata went home that night, and I lay in the quiet of the ICU with my charger plugged in and my phone in my hand, and I started making calls I had been too safe, too trusting, too handled to make before. The first call was to a family attorney I knew from the law firm. I did not call him at the office. I called his cell. He answered on the third ring, and I told him everything in about 7 minutes, and when I finished, there was a brief silence, and he said, "Claire, do you own the house jointly?" I said the house was titled in Marcus's name. He was quiet again. He said, "Check your bank accounts tonight, all of them. Do it before you sleep." I did. The joint savings account, which had held $44,000 as of October, showed a balance of $900. The checking account was intact, but only because Marcus had apparently not expected me to be reviewing finances from an ICU bed 3 days post-surgery. There is a specific kind of cold that comes from looking at a number on a screen and understanding in 1 second that you have been watched and measured and timed. It is not anger yet. It is something more accurate than anger. It is clarity. Marcus arrived on day 3 with flowers, grocery store, still in the plastic sleeve, and an expression calibrated to convey exhaustion and concern in equal measure. He kissed my forehead and said the kids had been asking for me. My mother came in behind him carrying a foil-covered casserole dish she set on the bedside table without comment. They sat down. They arranged themselves with the ease of people who had rehearsed. I had arranged myself too. The notebook was in the drawer. My phone was face down. I had washed my face and braided my hair, and I was sitting up in the bed with my hands in my lap, and I said, very evenly, "Tell me about the savings account, Marcus." He blinked. A very small movement, but I had been married to him for 7 years. I knew his inventory. He said it had been a hard month, and there were some payments he had to cover. My mother looked at the casserole dish. Neither of them looked at each other, which is how I knew they had already discussed what to say. I said nothing else. I let it sit. The monitor beeped, 4 seconds, and Marcus started talking to fill the silence, which is exactly what I had counted on, and within 4 minutes he had mentioned a name, just once, first name only, almost reflexively, that I had never heard before. A woman named Sandra. He caught it the second it left his mouth. He reset. He moved the conversation. My mother redirected to the casserole, but I had the name, and Renata, sitting in her apartment that same night with her laptop and a legal research database she accessed through the firm's subscription, had Sandra's full name and address within 2 hours. Sandra Birch, 31 years old, a dental hygienist from Dunmore. She had been on Marcus's health insurance as a domestic partner since September. Our third trimester was September. The month Rose stopped being a possibility and became a plan. Let me stay with that for a moment, because I think it needs to be said clearly. While I was 32 weeks pregnant with a high-risk pregnancy, managing blood pressure medications and twice-weekly monitoring appointments, and the ordinary terror of loving something you cannot yet protect, he was filing paperwork. He was making her permanent on a document. He knew, before I did, how this was going to end. My mother knew. That is the part I have to say next, because it is the part that took me the longest to be willing to look at directly. Diane knew. She had known since at least October, which I eventually confirmed through phone records Renata obtained through a civil subpoena during the divorce proceedings. 31 calls between Marcus and my mother between September and November, some lasting 40 minutes, one lasting over an hour. She had not been managing me on Sundays over coffee. She had been managing him, and what Marcus had offered her, what I believe he had promised her, was financial help with the house in Clark Summit, the deferred maintenance she never had money for, the roof that had been failing since 2019. My mother, who had raised me on discipline and presentation and that navy blazer in a dry cleaning bag, had traded her silence for a new roof and a promise. I cried once about this. In the hospital bathroom, the door locked, the water running. Renata was in the waiting room with her notebook. I gave myself 4 minutes because 4 minutes was what I had, and then I washed my face and went back to bed and picked up my phone and continued building the file. The file. I should describe it because it became important. Renata had started it on a manila folder she labeled in pencil with the case reference number from my attorney's intake form. By the time I was discharged from Mercy Regional, the folder had grown to include the insurance enrollment documents, the bank withdrawal records, the phone records, the title search on the Dalton house showing Marcus as sole owner, a detailed timeline of the savings account balance, and 4 pages of dated notes in Renata's precise handwriting covering everything she had observed in the 8 months prior. It was not thick yet. It was a beginning. I went home from the hospital to my mother's house in Clark Summit because I had nowhere else to go. Marcus had not suggested I return to Dalton. We had not discussed it. I took the kids on a Tuesday afternoon. Owen was 6, Lily was 4, and I loaded 2 bags in their car seats and drove 20 minutes up Route 6 while the sky went the particular flat gray that northeastern Pennsylvania does in December, the color of old pewter, the color of waiting. My mother and I did not discuss what I knew, not directly. She made soup, she asked about my blood pressure, she folded laundry in the living room while Owen watched cartoons and Lily slept on my chest, and I sat in the same chair I had sat in since childhood, with my daughter's warm weight against me and the folder tucked into my overnight bag 2 feet away, and I thought about that gray blazer, still in the dry cleaning bag upstairs in her closet, and what it cost a person to hold something that carefully for that long. The divorce attorney I retained, not my colleague from the firm, but a woman named Patricia Voss who practiced family law in Scranton with a reputation for being surgical in the discovery phase, told me in our first meeting that the case had several parallel tracks. The marital assets track, the house titled solely in Marcus's name, had been purchased during the marriage using joint income, which under Pennsylvania equitable distribution law meant I had a claim regardless of how it was titled. The dissipation track, $44,000 withdrawn from a joint account during an ongoing pregnancy, constituted marital waste and was actionable. The domestic abuse track was a word she used carefully and I received carefully. The isolation in the hospital, the deliberate communication to medical staff designed to reduce my access to care and information, documented. That last one opened a door I had not anticipated. Patricia Voss referred me to a colleague who worked in conjunction with the Lackawanna County District Attorney's Office. His name was James Cutler. He was 47, former public defender, and he had the particular stillness of someone who has heard every version of every story and has learned to listen for what is not being said. I met him at a diner on North Washington Avenue on a Thursday morning in January. I wore my own clothes, pressed. I brought the folder. He read through the phone records and the insurance enrollment forms without speaking, drinking his coffee with one hand and turning pages with the other. When he reached the hospital documentation, the charge nurse's notes, obtained through my medical records request, containing the words Patient's husband reports history of dramatic behavior and family instability. He set down his coffee cup. He looked at me. He said, "He submitted this before you regained consciousness." I said, "Yes." He said, "Do you have the timestamp on the nurse's notation?" I slid the page across the table. The notation was logged at 6:47 a.m. on the morning after my surgery. I had not come out of anesthesia until after 10. Cutler looked at the page for a long moment. Then he put it back in the folder and closed it, and he said, "Interference with medical care is a criminal charge in Pennsylvania. What he did, getting to that nursing station before you woke up, providing false characterization of your psychological state for the purpose of limiting your access to care, that's not a divorce issue. That's potentially a crime." The file became a legal exhibit. Renata's notes became a sworn declaration. Patricia Voss filed the equitable distribution complaint in February. The hospital record submission went to the district attorney's office the same week. Marcus was served at his office on a Thursday. I know this because Owen, who was then 6 and already possessed of his grandmother's instinct for observation, told me that Daddy had come home early that day and was really mad about papers. The house in Dalton was appraised at $387,000. The joint income contribution analysis, prepared by the same forensic accountant Patricia Voss used in every high-asset divorce she handled, showed that over 7 years of marriage, my income had contributed directly to 61% of the mortgage payments. Marcus's argument that the house was solely his because his name was on the deed was rejected at the first motion hearing. Pennsylvania doesn't care whose name is on the document. Pennsylvania cares whose sweat paid for the walls. The $44,000 in marital waste was attached to a court order requiring Marcus to account for every withdrawal. His accounting was incomplete. He claimed home repairs. The receipts he submitted were for a property in the Pocono Mountains, a cabin rental, 2 separate weekends, paid on a joint card he had since canceled. The Pocono cabin. Renata found the booking confirmation through a credit card dispute record. She had thought to request it 4 weeks earlier, for exactly this reason. She was 28 years old and she moved through evidence like she had been doing it for decades. The criminal referral moved faster than the divorce. By March, the district attorney's office had issued a formal inquiry. By April, Marcus had retained a criminal defense attorney. By May, he had accepted a plea agreement that included a formal admission of criminal harassment and interference with medical care, a suspended sentence contingent on a clean record for 3 years, mandatory counseling, and, in a provision his attorney had fought hard against and lost, a formal notation in the court record that his conduct in the hospital had been premeditated and deliberately deceptive. That notation mattered to me more than the sentencing. I wanted it in the record. I wanted it to exist as a fact, not an allegation, not a claim, a fact, documented, stamped, permanent. The civil case closed in June. I was awarded 53% of the Dalton House equity, full legal and physical custody of Owen and Lily, and a support structure that Patricia Voss described, without expression, as appropriate. The $44,000 in marital waste was factored into the asset division. Marcus's attorney called it a harsh outcome. Patricia looked at him across the conference table and said nothing. She did not need to. My mother and I had one conversation about all of it, one real one. It was in her kitchen in Clark Summit in July, the windows open, the sound of the neighbor's mower running outside. She was standing at the counter with her back to me. I said, "I know about the calls, Mom." She did not move for a long moment. Then she put both hands flat on the counter and she said, "I was scared of losing the house." Her voice was very quiet. Almost without weight, I said, "I know," because I did, because I had grown up in that house too, and I knew exactly what it would cost a woman like my mother to watch it taken. I knew the winter when the furnace broke and we ate canned tomato soup for 11 days and she never once complained, just kept pressing those gray slacks and going to work. I knew what the house meant. I also knew what it had cost me. We have not been close since. We are not estranged. There is just a door between us now that neither of us opens very far, and we have both agreed, without saying so, to live with that. The new house is in South Abington Township. I close on it in August. 3 bedrooms, a yard that is slightly too large for one person to manage, which is exactly what I wanted, something that requires a little more than you have, so you stay in the habit of rising to it. Owen has already claimed the room with the window seat. Lily has requested that her room be painted the specific shade of yellow that she describes as like butter but louder, and I have agreed, because she is 4 and she is exactly right. Renata was promoted to junior associate this spring. She came into my office on the morning the announcement was made with the same expression she had worn in my hospital room. Not pride, exactly. Something more useful than pride. Satisfaction. The quiet kind that comes from having done the thing correctly. I told her she had earned it. She said, we both did. I kept the notebook she brought me in the hospital. It lives in the drawer of my nightstand. The inside cover still has Rose's name on it, written in my handwriting. The letter's a little unsteady. I look at it sometimes, not often. Enough. Here is what I know now that I did not know in November, lying in that ICU bed with the call light blinking and no one coming. I know that the people who isolate you are counting on your silence. They do your paperwork before you wake up. They speak to the room before you have a voice. They depend entirely on the gap between when you are vulnerable and when you become capable of acting. That gap is their whole strategy. The only way to defeat it is to close the gap faster than they expect. You document everything. You pick up the phone, you find the Renata in your life, the person sitting in the waiting room with a notebook and a gas station coffee who showed up because she noticed, not because you asked. And then you build the file, one page at a time, in pencil, if that is what you have. What my mother taught me, the ironing, the presentation, the careful keeping of the blazer in the bag, she taught me that a woman prepares for what is coming even when she does not know what it is. She was not wrong about that. She just applied it to the wrong cause. I applied it to the right one. To any woman listening to this in a hospital bed, or sitting in a kitchen with the wrong feeling in your chest, or watching two people smile at you in a way that does not match what they have been saying behind your back, the gap is real. The documentation is legal and obtainable. The attorney who picks up on the third ring exists. The paralegal with the notebook exists. You are not dramatic. You are accurate. And accuracy, it turns out, is the most dangerous thing you can bring into a room. Do not wait for them to come back. They are not coming back. Start the file. If you have ever watched someone walk out of a hospital room and known, not suspected, known, that something had already been arranged before you opened your eyes, I want to hear from you in the comments. How did you know? What was the first thing that told you the room had been worked before you woke up in it? If this story hit you somewhere real, you know what to do. Like, subscribe, share it with the person who needs to hear it. I'll see you soon.